And now, the Rink Rap Podcast from Forever Blueshirts, talking all things New York Rangers hockey. Here's your host, Jim Cerny.
What's going on, everybody? Appreciate you tuning into the Rink Rap Podcast on Forever Blueshirts. I'm Lou Orlando, filling in for your usual host, Jim Cerny. Jim's on a well-deserved vacation. You know, you follow our site, you follow the podcast, you know he's a pretty hard-working guy. One of the hardest working guys that I know in the industry. It basically covers this team 7 days a week, 365 days a year. So, you know, he deserves a break. He deserves to take some time off and have some fun. And, I'll take over here and steer the ship for a week until he's back. And listen, right, it's not like he missed all that much. Right, Rangers are back down in the dumps. I think we can talk about Alexis Lafreniere as his surge continues. Is it for real? Is this something that you can bank on? We'll get into that. I think there's an interesting conversation to be had about Gabe Perreault and how this team is going to utilize him the rest of the year and maybe moving forward as well. But I think we can keep this somewhat on the shorter side, especially after an hour-long podcast last week between Jim and Pierre Maguire, and that was really good. So no need to go crazy long here. I do want to say, again, really appreciate, I don't say that lightly, really appreciate you guys tuning in because there's a lot of stuff going on in the sports world, right? March Madness started yesterday, and March Madness is one of my favorite times of the year. You know, if you've got, what I did yesterday is I had the Rangers game on the big screen and I had VCU North Carolina on my computer. But right, there's a lot of different things that you could be watching over the Rangers. That VCU North Carolina game was awesome. VCU came back from down 19, won in overtime. I'm not going to take this too far off the rails, but I do want to shout out, right? You see the flag behind me. I'm a Fordham guy. I covered Fordham basketball. Fordham's in the A10. Got my Rose Thrill shirt on. How about 2 wins by the A10? That's awesome. VCU and St. Louis, right? In this house, we love them in major basketball. So wanted to shout that out. But yeah, I say all that to say, there's a lot going on. You're doing a lot of different things besides watching the Rangers and keeping up with them on a game-to-game basis with, a lot of other things to do besides consuming Rangers content on a regular basis, especially when you consider the way this season has gone. So we appreciate you guys. You guys are sickos, you're diehard fans, and I get it, man. I'm the same way. And in this lost season, right, what does everyone want to see? You want to see the kids play. They want Gabe Pro on the first line. What's this kid about? The same concept applies to Forever Blueshirts columnists. Jim's been doing this for forever. Take a week off. Let the kid that's fresh out of college do the podcast for a week. And so, take over things here before I'm promptly sent down to Hartford. Hopefully we don't burn the place down in the process. I think let's start just leaping off of what Jim and Pierre talked about last week. And that was probably 10 days ago, the last recording. And during the midst of that pretty cool surge the Rangers had out of the Olympic break, where they kind of looked just like a completely different team, a team we really hadn't seen all season long. And one of the things they kind of talked about is, all right, what do we make of this? Is this fool's gold? Is this for real? I think we got our answer, right? It was fool's gold. And I have to say, if you were hedging your bets, you're probably leaning towards it being fool's gold. I mean, right, we've just seen too much of a sample size of this team to think that on a dime, they're going to flip things around and have this sensational close to the second half of the season where they win games at a 600, 700 points percentage. So we're back into familiar territory, right? They lose 4-1 on Monday against the Kings. Artemi Panarin returns to the Garden, and you have a back-to-back Wednesday and Thursday, back-to-back 6-3 losses to the Devils and the Blue Jackets. And I gotta say, right, you're seeing more of the first half of the season Rangers. A lot of struggles defensively. A lot of bad positioning defensively on a lot of those goals, especially Wednesday and Thursday. Not seeing the same life from puck drop. It was interesting watching that 4-game winning streak and watching the energy that they played with, because again, it's something that looked almost unrecognizable to the product that we've seen on the ice for so much of this season. Last few games, very recognizable, right? The Rangers get off to that. I only had 2 shots on goal in the first period against the Devils. At one point, when they scored their second goal, New York did, they had 2 goals on 3 shots. So they were getting heavily outshot by Jersey. Again against Columbus, just too many mistakes. And they had chances to win that game, funnily enough. Like, Columbus did not play the cleanest game ever, right? But neither did New York. And New York ended up looking like the worst, sloppier team in the process. I guess quickly, we don't have to spend too much time on Panarin returning to the Garden, but there was a lot of quotes that came out beforehand as Artemi was reflecting on his New York Rangers tenure. You can still tell that he's a little hurt by how everything ended, and has not been shy about the fact that he felt like he wasn't wanted. And maybe that was right for the Rangers to do, in the sense of, you see where this team is headed, and you don't want to bring Artemi Panarin back. There's maybe no point in bringing back an elite point producer like that. I looked at his contract and went, ooh, it's a retool and a rebuild, and get Artemi Panarin 2 years and $11 million AAV. I think I sign up for that any day of the week. But clearly the Rangers want to go in a different direction. I think Artemi Panarin's return to the Garden ended up being good and without controversy. The tribute video that they played, I thought, was really well made, and I like that it ended with that goal against Pittsburgh, the OT winner, and that first round of those 2022 playoffs, because that's the first Artemi Panarin moment that I think of. Really, I remember where I was when that goal happened, and clearly he got emotional as he was skating on the ice watching that video, and he got some nice love taps from, I think, Fox and Trocheck and Lafreniere. And afterwards, I think some of the cool stuff, right? Like, we didn't get to see a ton of Artemi Panarin on video. And I remember I was a student at Fordham at the time, covering some of those Rangers teams. And Artemi was always great to talk to and give you really good answers, would answer basically anything you threw at him. But the one rule with Artemi Panarin in the Rangers locker room was no cameras. And that changed when he came back to the Garden on Monday. It was cameras at practice. And he went on tape and answered questions, and he went on tape afterwards and answered questions and said that he wanted to do that for the Rangers fans. I think that's a cool gesture from Artemi Panarin. I think that probably just, puts an end to everything, right? It was a fun chapter in Rangers history. He's one of the greatest free agent signings in New York history, certainly in the 21st century. And he moves on. I think if you're a Rangers fan, you've got to hope. You should be cheering for the Kings. If you're one of those Ranger fans that was like, hey, careful, they're winning too much, right? Then Monday's loss against the Kings helped you in a couple different ways, because, well, A, you're back in the loss column, but B, you want the Kings to make the playoffs. You want the Kings to make a deep run and get some of those conditional draft picks. Is it going to be a life-changing draft pick, right? No, at best it's going to be a second-round pick, right? So it's nothing that's going to change your world or anything like that. But you should still want the better pick, and there's really no harm in rooting for the Kings at this stage. Maybe if you're still bent out of shape about the 2014 Stanley Cup final, but I mean, it's basically a whole different team outside of Anze Kopitar at this point. That's another thing I wanted to mention really quickly. I've definitely gotten more cynical since I've graduated college. I graduated last spring. I think that's just the way life works, and it doesn't help the Rangers this season. It's very easy to be cynical about hockey and about this team. That moment post-game after the 4-1 loss to Los Angeles, seeing the entire Rangers team line up and shake Kopitar's hand, and then at the very end to see a nice long embrace between Jonathan Quick and Anze Kopitar, who spent so much time together with the Kings. I believe it was either 14 or 16 seasons together in Los Angeles, and obviously they win the 2 cups. That's, for people that are my age, I'm 23, those are 2 of the greatest players you ever watched in your entire life. And even if you're a little bit older, I think you can still appreciate those are 2 really defining players of a generation. Jonathan Quick is the greatest American goalie of all time, and Anze Kopitar is one of, if not the best, 2-way centers of all time. I mean, I think he's certainly right up there in the conversation with Patrice Bergeron. I think that certainly applies to the 21st century in terms of that, but I think you could probably make a pretty good case that he's one of the best two-way centers in NHL history. And so to see that moment, and obviously Andrei Kopitar is a first ballot Hall of Famer. He did the same thing when he visited the Islanders. The Islanders lined up, they shook his hand. It's his last game at the Garden. I thought it was classy there were a lot of Ranger fans that stayed behind and gave him an ovation. And that was something that Henrik Lundqvist talked about after the fact on the MSG postgame show. There's only a few players that get that treatment. And so that's one of those moments I kind of lean back and went, this has been a pretty forgettable season. I think that's a moment I'm going to remember of in the midst of this really crummy season. You get the special moment between Andrei Kopitar and Jonathan Quick. And it's two iconic Kings legends, right? I'd probably make the case that Kopitar is the greatest King of all time. And Jonathan Quick certainly has his place in Kings history for what he did. He won the Conn Smythe during the 2012 Cup run. I don't need to tell you Ranger fans how good he was in the 2014 Stanley Cup final either. So I know it's not necessarily Rangers history, but it's hockey history. I thought that was a cool moment. But yeah, in terms of the Rangers being brought back down to earth here, maybe the first sense of it shifting was Saturday against Minnesota. Ironically enough, when the captain JT Miller returns to the lineup. Now, that's a game the Rangers win 4-2, but it clearly was not their best effort. They got outshot 48-18. Well, okay. I mean, hey, they won the game. You give them credit for winning the game. You got outshot 48-18. Okay, this is not... They don't look as good as they have the past few games, right? And then that continued into the Kings game and certainly the Devils game where they got heavily outshot in that first period. Is it all JT Miller's fault? Probably not, but it is kind of funny and maybe fitting that this season, with how much ire JT Miller has drawn from the fans, that he gets back into the lineup. They win that first game, but they get outshot by 30. And then it's 3 straight games where they lose and they don't look all that good. But I think this is kind of what we've come to expect with the Rangers. And it is probably for the best, right? You want to put yourself in the best position to get a lottery draft pick. One of those, if you can land Gavin McKenna or Stenberg, that's going to put you in the best position moving forward as a franchise. So I had a feeling that they were going to taper off and start losing some more games here. I guess a couple quick notes. Even though the last couple games haven't been all that good, Mika Zibanejad is still producing at a great rate. He's up to 29 goals and 66 points in 68 games. And his career high is 39 goals, and that was in the 2022-23 season. So it looks like he's going to he should break the 30 goal mark again, because he's got, upwards of, I'm not great at math, but I think that's 14 games to do it. So he should get that done. I don't know if he can chase down the 39, but he could probably get in the mid-30s here the way he's playing. It's been cool to see Mika return to form. I think that's been nice. And I don't know how much that does for you in a season like this where so much has gone wrong. But especially after last year and how off he looked, to see Mika play this well, especially if that's someone that, I mean, maybe you can convince him to waive your no move, but he's been pretty committed to staying in New York. So it behooves you to unlock Mika and have him be his best self. And that's in a lot of ways what you've gotten this year. What you don't want to see is Noah Laba go down with an injury in the Devils game and get scratched Thursday. And it was tough to tell. Weren't really able to pinpoint what the inciting incident was. Thought I heard some rumblings that it may have been a hip injury. Right? That's what you don't want to see, because this last stretch of 14 games, right? This is the time we want to see the kids play. We want to see, and even though it's not high stakes hockey anymore, you want to see the Rangers young kids develop and really get tested and put them in positions and see what you have in them moving forward into next season. And I thought Noah Laba looked great on that third line, especially with Ty Cartier, who they claimed off of waivers from Seattle. Now, I don't know how much excitement there was from Ranger fans coming in about Cartier. The one thing I remember is a lot of times I'll do this. I'll go into other teams' social media, whether it's Twitter or Reddit or whatever, and see, okay, how do fans feel about losing this player? A lot of Kraken fans were really upset about losing Ty Cartier. And, I think he probably is what he is. He's not a super high offensive ceiling guy, but it feels like he could be a really solid third liner, probably an awesome fourth liner on a championship team. But for a team like the Rangers, really good third liner, was playing well with Noah Laba. They looked really good in the penalty kill together. So it stings to see Laba go down, because that's one of the reasons that you might tune in down the stretch here, is to watch guys like Gabe Pro and Noah Laba, and honestly Ty Cartier. Yeah, I'm learning a lot more about Ty Cartier with every game. I'm a big fan of the way he plays. I thought someone compare him to Ryan Callahan. I mean, certainly not the same offensive skill set. And, if Ty Cartier offensively became even half of the player that Ryan Callahan was offensively, you'd be thrilled. That would be a great third line player. But I see it on the defensive end, right? Gritty, fast, block shots, plays, full speed, high effort game. There's a lot to like about Ty Cartier. Those are the type of moves that Chris Drury should be going out there and making, right? It doesn't cost him anything to claim Ty Cartier off of waivers. 24-year-old kid. Why not? Right? It's a lost season. You've got the open roster spots. These are the type of moves you should be making as you're retooling or rebuilding, whatever you want to call it. On the other side, I really want to get into, there's interesting conversations to have about Alexis Lafreniere and Gabe Pro. And is Gabe Pro maybe following in Lafreniere's footsteps in terms of play usage and line usage? We'll get into all of that after this quick break. Welcome back to Rink Rap, Blue Orlando. I think this is the really interesting part of this episode. This is the meat and potatoes of this conversation. I think it starts off with Alexis Lafreniere. I think that's the person that everyone wants to talk about right now, and rightfully so, because you want to talk about someone that's played inspired hockey and looked like a completely different person since the Olympic break. I know I'm not breaking new ground, right? A lot of people have already talked about this, but it's Alexis Lafreniere. 8 goals and 15 points in 12 games since coming back from the Olympic break. 3 of those goals have come on the power play, and so he's getting all this top power play time. Obviously, with Panarin gone, that opens up a spot for Lafreniere to kind of be a fixture there. I thought this stat was interesting. Alexis Lafreniere had 3 power play goals in a 7-game stretch. His career high coming into this season, in a full season, was 3 power play goals. So now he's got 6 already. He's doubled his career high. He matched it in a 7-game span. I mean, he looks good in the power play. He looks aggressive. He's still passing the puck. I think, Laf's always made pretty good passes, and you'd see Ranger fans lament. Lafreniere would have an extra, 10, 20 points if people just finished off some of his passes. So I think he's always been a pretty good passer, but he looks really aggressive offensively. You're seeing that creativity. And it is funny because it was always in there, right? You remember that crazy goal against Montreal he scored a few years ago. And it almost became like a running bit with Lafreniere that once a year, he was good for a crazy 2-3 game stretch where you'd see him play like the kid you saw in the OHL, the kid that had all those highlight reels that made him, the clearly, no question, number 1 overall pick. And every once in a while, in his first 5 years, you'd see him pull off a couple of moves, and you'd go, "That's that guy. I want to see more of that." You're seeing it over. And right now, this is a 10-plus game sample size of Lafreniere looking like a first-line caliber forward. They got into this in the MSG postgame show on Thursday. Yesterday, I'm recording on Friday. And I thought it was interesting, like, how much weight do you put into this? And Steve Valiquette, who I really respect, and I put a lot of weight into his analysis, I thought hit the nail on the head, which is, I think you have to be skeptical about any run that happens in quote-unquote garbage time. And though the Rangers are not officially eliminated, this is let's face it, it's garbage time. We're past the trade deadline, so the nerves have kind of settled. You're not really worried about getting kicked off the team at this point. Everyone can kind of relax and take a deep breath. There's also no pressure to succeed. And in fact, if I had to bet, I'm sure that the majority of the fan base at this point actually probably wants you to fail so they can get a good draft pick, right? So the pressure's off. And sometimes that creates these odd 20 to 25 game surges where a team plays free and they end up being dangerous. And the one thing that Steve Valiquette said about Lafreniere is that, this can't be the, oh, he's made it moment. You can't go into the offseason and say, all right, I've arrived. Like, I am who I'm supposed to be. He's got to use this as fuel for the offseason. And the word he used, I really like this, was have it be a springboard. Have this be the jumping off point for Lafreniere turning into the player we all thought he could be. I think what's tough about this is I'm excited, obviously. I think Lafreniere looks great. I'm not going to, if you're excited, I'm not going to damper your enthusiasm. There hasn't been a lot of things to get excited about this season. Lafreniere playing like a game changer is something. That's at least something to start having hope about, even if you don't fully believe it just yet. That's a little nugget of, well, maybe that turns into something. I do think, though, it's worth noting. He has done this before. I think most notably the back half of the President's Trophy season in 2023-24. Right, Lafreniere finishes that season, and I believe it's 28 goals and 57 points, which are both career highs. But I think about the postseason. He had 8 goals in that that run to the Eastern Conference Final, which tied Vincent Trocheck for the team lead. He had, I want to say, 4 goals against the Florida Panthers. And I remember where I was. I was at Blondie's on the Upper West Side watching that game. That's the Alex Wenberg overtime winner. And I remember where I was when Lafreniere walked into the offensive zone, split 2 defenders, and hit that crazy deke and beat Bobrovsky to score that goal. I remember that vividly. And I remember coming away from that postseason and the way he played against the Panthers, when it felt like so many Rangers that we really relied on that season struggled to do anything offensively. And Lafreniere was one of the bright spots. Lafreniere was the most dominant Ranger against that awesome Florida Panthers team that was so good and so deep. And I remember how I felt after that. I thought he had arrived. I was like, that's his moment. That's what he needs for his confidence. He's going to take that, use it moving forward, and Lafreniere is going to be, even if he's not a superstar, Lafreniere is going to be a quality top 6 guy that can maybe score 20 to 30 goals a season, bank on him for 50 to 70 points. I mean, you'd sign up for that right now, right? Thinking about how Lafreniere's career has progressed. You'd sign up for a 20 to 30 goal guy and a 50 to 70 point guy. You do that in a heartbeat, 100%. Can he still be that guy? Right, it's tough because that's the thing is we've seen a surge like this before. And, if you remember, he started out the 2024-25 season pretty good, got that contract extension, and ever since then had kind of tapered out and looked more like the Lafreniere that was too passive too often, not aggressive enough in the offensive zone, not shooting enough, obviously not scoring enough, not creating enough. Right, you're seeing all of that ramp up in this recent stretch. For me, I'm cautiously optimistic. Like, I think one of the really interesting things that we're going to have to talk about this offseason is what you do with Lafreniere. Do you still trade him? Or do you still try to trade him or shop him around and see, does this make his value go up? Does a team look at Lafreniere and go, all right, we think that's legit, and we're willing to give up some younger assets, some maybe intriguing assets to do it. I don't think that you're going to get a top-notch prospect. I don't even know if you can get, as it stands, for Lafreniere by himself, could he get a Liam Greentree prospect, right? Greentree's supposed to be like a middle six guy, leaning more towards third line than second line. Can you get a former first round pick who's young for Lafreniere? Would you even want to do it at that point? Right? I think that it's all conversations to be had in the offseason. I don't think this run that he's having makes him untouchable. If anything, I think it almost adds the onus to you have to make the right decision on him this offseason, because before play resumed after the Olympics, before this run by Lafreniere, if you went up to a Rangers fan during the Olympic break and said, hey, if you could have traded Lafreniere after the 2024 postseason, when he had that great series against the Florida Panthers, would you do it? And even if it wasn't for the craziest return, right? Would you have traded him at what you think is maybe his peak value since he's become somewhat of a depreciated asset? I wonder what the answer would be. I think a lot of Ranger fans at the Olympic break probably would have said, yes, we should have traded Lafreniere then. That's when his value was at his highest. We had a chance to turn him into something valuable. We waited too long, and he's not the guy that we think he was. It's awesome to see Lafreniere play this way now, but would you kick yourself if 2-3 years from now he's still on the team? It turns out this ends up being like a 15-20 game stretch that was really good, but didn't sustain. And you look back at this offseason that's coming up and you go, yeah, maybe we wouldn't get blown away by any trade return that we get, but maybe it was better trading him then than holding on to him and hoping that he's going to turn into a guy that we can, build around in this retool. It's tough. That's one of those situations where I wouldn't want to be in Chris Drury's shoes, because I'm not sure. I think it can bite you both ways. You could trade Lafreniere. Turns out that this surge wasn't a fluke. He's actually going to turn into a 20-30 goal guy. I mean, he's already right. He reached the 20 goal mark on Thursday with that power play goal. So he already is he's a 20 goal guy. So let's say, all right, maybe you trade him and he becomes a 30 goal, 70, 80 point guy. And you're kicking yourself going, man, if we waited it out, we would have finally enjoyed some of the Lafreniere experience. It would have finally paid off a little more. The flip side is you hold on to him and he goes back and maybe he's just a 20 goal, 40, 50 point guy. And even 50 points is closer to his career high. So 20 goal, 30, 40 point guy. And you're kicking yourself going, oh man, we had one last chance where his value took a little bit of a bump that we should have moved on from him. I don't know. It's awesome to see him do well in the power play. He looks super comfortable there. He doesn't look like he's worried about losing his job, which I think is probably a factor. And that goal that he scored against Columbus, kind of Chris Kreider-esque, right? Going to the net, getting the stick on that, and getting it past Greaves. Right? That's a nice play. It's a play that you'd like to see Lafreniere do more often. Hey, go to the net, get a stick on this. Rangers haven't really had a go-to net front guy since they traded Kreider. Now, it's only been one season, but, in this season so far, we haven't really seen anyone step up and take over the net front and be a real threat there right in front of the crease. Could Lafreniere be that guy? Maybe. It is interesting. There, former Rangers coach Peter Laviolette went on the Tri-State Hockey Podcast this week. It's a podcast with a few names you'll recognize, right? Johnny Lazarus, who's big Rangers beat reporter and content creator in our world. Arthur Staple, who covers the Rangers and the Islanders, and Mike Rupp. So you get former Ranger, former NHL talent there. They had Laviolette on, and I thought the most interesting part of that interview, or one of the most interesting parts, I highly recommend it. Tri-State Hockey Podcast, plug it up on YouTube. Really good watch. And Laviolette's down in Florida now. He's got the beard all thick. You can tell maybe he's enjoying post-coaching life. Maybe he's not. Either way, he was a good sport in the interview. One of the most interesting conversations was Lafreniere and his power play usage. And Johnny, even said like, hey, hand up. I was one of the guys that was really banging the drum for Lafreniere needs power play one time. And Laviolette kind of worked his way through the process, the mental process of why Lafreniere never really got a full-time crack at that opportunity. And you'll remember during the President's Trophy season, right? That's a power play, obviously quarterbacked by Fox as a defenseman, but he had 4 forwards, and it was Kreider, Panarin, Trocheck, and Zibanejad, right? I got everyone there. And that power play ended up being 3rd best in the league. I mean, it was gangbusters. And it was going to be really tough to make an argument to break up that power play. The next year, not so much, right? The power play plummets. Mika Zibanejad really struggles, held to less than 10 power play goals for the first time since 2016-17. So, right, it wasn't working with Zibanejad. His one-timer was off. But Laviolette defended the decision and said, that power play hit at such a high clip the season before that we never really felt like we wanted to break it up. We never felt like that was the right decision. And he's like, we tried Lafreniere. We gave Lafreniere opportunities, a couple cracks at power play one, and he did, especially in that last season, 2024-25. Laviolette starts to jumble some things around, and Lafreniere gets a few different cracks at it, and it never really sticks for any significant length of time. And, he kind of went down the line of, obviously you're not taking Artemi Panarin off the power play. Chris Kreider, when he's healthy, is one of the best net front guys, so you're not going to take him off the power play. Vincent Trocheck, well, he wins the faceoffs at such a high clip, so you're talking about possession right off the jump, and he plays a good bumper, so it's tough to take him out. And then Mika, historically has been really New York's best power play guy, right? He holds the team record for power play goals. He's got that one-timer from the left circle that Laviolette never felt like he really wanted to take that option away. And I think it's interesting because it's one of those two things can be true at once arguments. Is Lafreniere the 5th forward out of that 5 when you're talking about your stat resume and the skill set that they bring? Probably. And it's going to be tough to argue for Lafreniere. And it was always tough to argue for Lafreniere over one of those guys, even as Zibanejad was struggling. Even as Trocheck, I think people make the argument, well, Trocheck's not as much of a goal scorer as Lafreniere could be. Having Trocheck on there for the faceoff, is that as important as getting Lafreniere a full run at power play 1? Clearly, Laviolette thought that having Trocheck was the more valuable option. At the same time, we can all clearly say that Lafreniere's development is hurt by the fact that he didn't get a lot of power play time. And the fact that the way the Rangers ran that power play, you're talking about the first unit getting 90 seconds pretty much every time. So the second unit comes on and maybe you get one offensive zone sequence there, maybe a couple rushes, but it's not going to be super long. It's really tough to find a rhythm there. You obviously don't have as many talented puck movers and scoring talent there. It's a tough position to put a former number 1 overall pick. I thought that was interesting. It was, I listened to that and it brought back some of the memories of that debate. Where I think about it now, and I think this is maybe the most interesting conversation we'll have all day today, is the same thing happening to Gabe Perreault. Because Gabe Pro gets a crack on the first power play unit when JT Miller is out with that upper body injury. 5 games on that power play 1. The Rangers go 6 for 16 on the power play in that stretch with Perreault on that unit. And Perreault's already in a pretty good way, just overall, right? Playing that first line with Mika and Lafreniere. Point per game since the Olympic break, 4 goals, 12 points in 12 games. And Perreault looked like a good fit on the power play. And the power play was doing so well, it was kind of like, well, how do you break it up? How do you take any of these guys off? Miller comes back from his injury on Saturday, and Sullivan puts JT Miller right back in power play 1 and demotes Perreault to power play 2. Now he says, Perreault, Gabe shouldn't look at it as a demotion. Clearly, it's not about his, a problem with his skill or the way he's playing right now. But Sullivan talked about, when Miller's healthy, that's a guy we consider to be a mainstay on the power play. And it's just interesting because it almost feels like deja vu and you're going through it again, because I think you can make the same both sides can be true argument about this, where you can look at the 4 forwards that New York has on the power play right now on their top unit. And it's Mika who's having a resurgent season. You're not going to take him off. It's Lafreniere who's playing the best hockey that we've seen in 2 years. You're certainly not going to take him off. It's JT Miller who's your captain. Could you argue that maybe he should get taken off? Sure. He's also been okay on the power play at times. The underlying metrics and the analytics, the expected goals, actually have Miller above Perreault. So there's a pretty good analytical argument to have Miller over Perreault. And then you've got Vincent Trocheck, who's the interesting one, because Trocheck's played pretty well post-Olympic break as well. And, the other thing to think about here with Vincent Trocheck is obviously they didn't end up trading him at the deadline. And Drury, to his credit, asked for a lot, because that's a guy with 2.5 years of term, wins faceoffs, good middle six center, plays a 200-foot game, can really help a Stanley Cup winning team. And he asked for a lot. And I think, we heard the rumors. It was reported the starting baseline for conversations was a Brock Nelson type return. Okay. You want a good return for Vincent Trocheck in this offseason? It behooves you to put Vincent Trocheck in the best position to rack up points so that teams look at him in the offseason and go, you know what, on a bad Rangers team, Vincent Trocheck had a pretty good season. And even though he's going to be 33 and he's making, especially with the cap going up, that's a good deal at $5 million for a guy like Vincent Trocheck. Even though he was on a bad team, he really produced. And look at some of his numbers down the stretch. Now, is this another fool's gold thing? The pressure's off. He knew he wasn't traded, and teams are going to look at that and go, okay, that doesn't, at 20 game sample size, does that change the value for him at all? Even if Trocheck's value doesn't go up, if it doesn't depreciate, that's a win for the Rangers, right? In terms of what they can get for him in the offseason. So in that sense, if you really want the Rangers to get a good return for Vincent Trocheck, doesn't it make sense to put him on the power play and hope that he racks up some points there and see if that moves the needle? That certainly makes sense to me. The flip side of this is, and this is kind of where I fall on it, is the flip side is Gabe Pro is a 20-year-old first-round draft pick that has looked great since the Olympic break. And, he showed really good flashes early on of being a solid puck carrier, being strong in the puck, being aggressive in puck battles, even as maybe his defensive game was still coming along and his skating still coming along. He does a lot of the little things really, really well. There is a goal the Rangers scored, I think it was in the Devils game, that play gets started because Perreault comes up in the forecheck and forces a turnover. And you're just seeing Gabe Perreault do a lot of the little things that make you really excited about what he could be moving forward. And in a season where the Rangers aren't going to make the playoffs, that's incredibly clear at this point, right? Why not put Perreault in power play 1? It's a lost season. You're not going anywhere. The wins really don't matter at this stage of the game. Why not put him on power play 1 and let him reap the rewards and let him develop and let him get opportunities against, for a minute on the power play against other penalty kills and see what he can do, especially because the power play looked so good when he was on. It's a tough conversation to have because with Miller on power play 1 since the Olympic break, or this is a stat, since Miller's come back on the power play on March 12th, they're 3 for 13. So that's still pretty good. And honestly, if you want to look at the Rangers power play since the Olympic break, 29.4%, that's third best in the league. So this power play has looked good, regardless of whether it's Perreault or Miller on it. I do think it's one of these conversations where you just worry, is the same thing that happened to Lafreniere going to happen to Perreault? Now, I think what should give you a little reassurance is, okay, you kind of expect Vincent Trocheck to get moved in the offseason. It would be a shock if he's still here come next September, right? So you figure, okay, that's the plug and play, is that, either Miller Zibanejad takes the faceoff, and Perreault takes the fourth forward spot on that first power play. But what if the Rangers had another forward? It's now, right? Jason Robertson is maybe a name. Rangers would have to give up a lot to be able to get him. Brady Tkachuk's another name where if he decides he doesn't want to be in Ottawa anymore, is that a guy that you could land? Now, are you able to get either of those guys without trading Alexis Lafreniere? Right, I think that's for any worries about Perreault not being on power play 1 next year. You have to talk about a situation where either Trocheck and Lafreniere both come back next year, or Trocheck's gone, but another forward comes in and Lafreniere's still there, where Sullivan looks at that group and goes, I've got 4 forwards with more experience, and Gabe Pro is going to be on power play 2. That's kind of the worst case scenario, and that's weird to say about, imagine the Rangers get Jason Robertson and they don't have to trade Alexis Lafreniere to get him, or they trade for Brady Tkachuk and they don't have to trade Alexis Lafreniere to get him. That would probably be a win. I don't know how you get either of those guys without trading, frankly, one of, if not both of, Perreault and Lafreniere. So maybe this is a conversation that's just completely pointless. But I do, you worry about, in a little bit of a sense here, Perreault following in the footsteps of Lafreniere and his power play usage. Because as much as, and it makes a lot of sense to me, play Trocheck on the top power play unit, I think that's a good idea. I think it helps his trade value. And with JT Miller, that's your captain. And do you want to take off another Rangers captain, considering everything that went down with Trouba? Maybe you do want to tick off JT Miller if you're hoping that you can get rid of that contract and you think it's not going to age well. But clearly Mike Sullivan, who's the head coach of Team USA, really likes, respects, and appreciates JT Miller. And if you hear how he talks about JT Miller, Mike Sullivan does not think that JT Miller is the problem. So even if you do want JT Miller off this team, the truth of the matter is that Sullivan doesn't. And I think 10 times out of 10, Sullivan's going to put Miller on the power play over Perreault. But it's just tough to get over because, again, where is this season going? What is the point of this season if not to get your first-round picks and your youth and your kids some development and put them in a better position, give them a leg up for the development and their transition into next season when their role could be even bigger? And speaking of kids, as I'm recording this on Friday, Dylan Grandy gets recalled from Hartford. And it sounds like the Rangers goalie room might be a little banged up. We'll see with Dylan Grandy, right? Because it has not been the best season for him down at Hartford. Now, Hartford's also kind of a mess. So how much do you read into that? And, I feel bad sometimes watching Jonathan Quick, and I've seen some stuff online recently about, the games passed Jonathan Quick by, and what's the point of playing him? Grandy's 23, and do you want to, now there's 2 sides to that, right? Is if not now, when? Are we ever going to get a chance to see Grandy at the NHL level? For the longest time, it felt like he was supposed to be the backup successor to Igor, right? Is that Rangers would ride out Jonathan Quick for as long as he wanted, and then once he retires, all right, now Dylan Grandy, now you're the backup. And maybe that is still the plan at this stage of the game. Again, he's 23. That's young. It's also not young in the NHL, right? Sometimes it's tough. 23 is one of those weird in the middle spots, right? Like Alexis Lafreniere was 23 and in his 5th NHL season, and Dylan Grandy, right? We haven't really seen him yet. Do you want to throw Grandy in front of this dumpster fire of a team? Are you worried about him losing confidence? The way the Rangers defense has played the last couple games in those 2, letting up 6 goals, one with Igor in net, that's one with Quick in net. Do you want to throw him into the fire there? And what if he loses confidence and that's just the end? So I don't know. It also depends who's injured here. Did Jonathan Quick get banged up on Thursday, or is Igor dealing with something from the Devils game. Right? If it's Igor, that really changes the complexion of everything. I think had they not called up Garand and they just rode out the rest of the season with Jonathan Quick, I don't think it's the end of the world. Again, just because the defense has been so poor. And you almost feel bad for Jonathan Quick, who was a really, really good backup for a couple years here in New York. And it felt like everything took a downturn once Igor got hurt and Jonathan Quick had to be the starter. And he wasn't conditioned to be a starting goalie anymore, but he was a really good backup. But now it feels like maybe he's lost it a little bit. I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of it has to do with how poorly the Rangers have played sometimes in front of him. So we'll see if we see Dylan Grandy. Again, this is the whole point. That's why you're bummed that Laba got hurt, is you want the young kids to get some cracks here. I've always been a fan of, let's see what they can do. Like, I want to see Perreault on PP1. I would take Miller off. I'd take Miller off power play 1 and put Perreault on. I would give, whether or not Jonathan Quick or Igor Shesterkin's hurt, I would give Dylan Grandy a couple starts here at the end of the season. And maybe we'll see him soon. But, just to see. You never know. And again, it could totally backfire on you the other way. It could destroy his confidence. And then you're sitting there going, I really wish I didn't force him into the lineup when we knew we were already struggling. But I've always been a believer in, sometimes you got to go out there and figure it out. Sometimes the best way to figure stuff out and develop is by going out there and playing, and by getting thrown into situations that maybe you're not sure if you're ready for it yet, but you just got to go out there and do it. I think that's where we leave this episode, right? Again, Jim will be back next week, so you'll have your go-to guy back at the helm. But it's tough to really find things to latch onto here sometimes in a season like this. Now, Alexis Lafreniere has made that a little, and Gabe Pro have made that a little bit easier. Now, I was kind of worried about the end of the season kind of being a slog and like, oh boy, I got to watch the games for work, but do I want to? And that first line of Mika, Gabe, and Lafreniere, I started to have fun again. And I'm still having fun watching them as a line operate, even if some of the stuff around them hasn't been as fun. You got to find the little things in life to get some happiness out of, sometimes, especially when you're looking at a team like this. But again, so Rink Rap will be back next week. Jim will be at the helm. I'm Lou Orlando. Had a blast filling in. We'll plug some stuff here. Obviously, a lot of all of our articles at Forever Blueshirts, we'll tweet them out at Forever Blueshirts on Twitter. That's the number 4 ever Blueshirts. You can follow Jim Cerny on Twitter at Jim Cerny. That's CERNY. I'm at Sweet Lou on Twitter. There's 5 U's at the end of that. Don't ask me why. Sweet Lou, that's the name was taken. So you got to find creative ways to work around that. And again, everything's on our site, www.foreverblueshirts.com. So check out all of our articles. We got some really good stuff about Laviolette's comments on the Lafreniere power play. Got some good articles about Ty Cartier and his third line role. Have more stuff coming out this weekend. So check all that stuff out. Whether you're watching us on YouTube or on the audios, follow and subscribe. This has been the Rink Rap Podcast. Appreciate you guys tuning in. Have a good weekend, everybody.